Hello, wonderful human. In this video of your health kit, we want to talk about updating some assumptions. So, we tend to adopt beliefs throughout our life that can sometimes limit us in being able to do what we need to do. And so, a lot of those beliefs are actually given to us by the medical and rehab community, and I've found a lot of those to be false and to be very limiting. So this section, we're going to talk about unlearning some of those faulty assumptions and then learning some really important principles for applying during your sort of process of getting rid of whatever issue you're facing. So I think the first assumption that we make that I've found to be false is that as we get older, we break down. And I think everyone just sort of subconsciously adopts this, and this is quite reinforced in the medical and rehab community. And getting rid of that assumption and knowing that at all stages of your life, your body is extremely capable of adapting, is extremely capable of healing itself, adapting to what you expose it to. And so knowing that we don't just break down as we get older, we've simply had more time accumulating habits and lifestyle choices that create our bodies to break down, means that there's always hope. Okay, so the first assumption to unlearn is that as you get older, your body breaks down. That is a false assumption. It's really just we've had more time doing the wrong things, but if we do the right things, then our body doesn't break down as we get older, right? We can go 100 years without any osteoarthritis, without any breakdown, if we're doing the right things. So it's about aligning behaviors with what our biology is supposed to be doing. I think another faulty assumption that we adopt is that if you've tried to get rid of a problem, or you've seen a health professional to get rid of a problem and you didn't succeed, it's really easy to assume that you simply need to live with this problem, that you cannot get rid of it. It's something you have to live with. It's something, this is your new normal. And that's false, right? If you worked with a health professional and you weren't able to get rid of a problem permanently, it might mean that that health professional wasn't giving you the right things to do to address the root cause, right? Like we talked about in the gardening analogy, to get down into the root ball, take the root ball out so the weed doesn't grow back. And so getting rid of that assumption and knowing that if you give the body the right things, it will heal itself, it will organize itself into an optimal way and get rid of your symptoms. Okay, so unlearn the fact that as we get older, we break down. And if you tried to address a problem before and didn't succeed, even if it was the help of someone who has a degree, it doesn't mean you have to live with that problem. It simply means you weren't taking the right approach. So let's unlearn those two assumptions. Two things that we need to learn that are very helpful principles to keep in mind. The first one is that your body is this insanely magical and amazing thing that we don't fully understand. And this is a really sort of big flaw in the rehab medical community. If we don't understand something, we assume that it doesn't exist or it doesn't happen, and that's false. And our lack of knowing the details about how the body does a lot of what it does, right? Like the brain's a prime example. We don't know how this mushy ball inside of our skull creates consciousness. We don't understand that. And if we don't understand it and can't explain it with science, then we assume that it's not something to be learned. But the body, we have to know, and it's really important to know that in your corner, you have this machine that is evolved to be extremely effective at self-healing, which means that, you see it if you get a cut, your cut literally heals itself. If you rip like a piece of your couch doesn't heal itself, right? So our bodies are self-healing and they're also self-organizing, and this is a really important one. And that means that if the body is given the right inputs, the right data to use, it will literally organize itself into the most efficient way of operating. Okay, so you don't have to worry about exactly different degrees of motion or whether a muscle is being activated. Just give your body the right ingredients, the right movements, the right inputs. It knows exactly what to do with them. It can heal and adapt itself. We just have to give it the right stuff. Okay, so the body is self-healing and it's a self-organizing system. You don't have to know all the details about that, but just knowing that your body heals itself and adapts without you having to do anything is a really powerful thing to know. I think the second principle, which is really important to know when you're getting rid of a problem, is it's called the SAID principle. Okay, and SAID stands for specific adaptation to imposed demand. And all that, this is this fundamental base principle in physiology that says that when you expose the body to something, it will adapt in a way that takes that input or that exposure into account and makes itself more efficient at dealing with that input in future. Okay, so I'll give you a couple tangible examples. If I have the goal of building my bicep up, okay, the imposed demand is I take a weight and I do this a bunch of times. So the imposed demand is having to lift a 10-pound dumbbell many times. The specific adaptation is that my brain gets better at firing these bicep muscles, and the bicep muscles themselves start to get bigger. They kind of will tear, and then they'll rebuild themselves so that they're now stronger. So the imposed demand is lifting a weight multiple times like this. The specific adaptation is that my bicep gets stronger. Okay, and we know this. If you work out a muscle, the muscle gets bigger, the muscle gets stronger. But a couple of examples that we might not consider is something like spending a lot of time sitting in a chair with our hip at 90 degrees. So the imposed demand is big periods of time where our hip is bent at 90 degrees. The specific adaptation to that is that we start to tighten up and sort of contract a lot of the muscles at the front of the hip. And the consequence of that we might not think of is that it becomes much harder to extend our hip, right? So flexion is when we bend our hip forward. Extension is when our leg goes behind us. Extension is where our glutes work. Extension and weight bearing even is where our deep hip muscles start to be activated. So the imposed demand of not fighting gravity and putting our hip in a flex to 90-degree position for long periods of time results in the specific adaptation of losing the ability to extend our hip and therefore use our glutes, and tension developing in the anterior hip, which can tilt our pelvis forward, cause compression in our low backs, makes our knees do way more work because we can't use the hip like it's supposed to. So that's sort of this negative way that the SAID principle materializes, right? I'll give you one more example with regards to feet. So most shoes push our toes inward because our foot's designed to fan out, but most shoes taper inward. So the imposed demand is pushing the toes inward, and most shoes are very stiff and rigid, right? A lot of shoes are also supportive, and we often see this as a benefit because shoe companies say you need support in your shoe. So the imposed demand of wearing a stiff shoe that supports the arch of your foot and tapers in results in the specific adaptation of stiffening the joints of your foot, because if the shoe is stiff, the joints aren't going to be able to move, therefore they will stiffen up. If the shoe is the imposed demand of supporting your arch means that the specific adaptation is the muscles that support your arch naturally, that we have built in, we all have these, starts to not be able to do that job. They weaken and they start to not really need to fire because it's being done for them, right? The imposed demand of pushing your toes in like this results in the specific adaptation of your toes getting squished together and developing things like bunions, okay? So specific adaptation to imposed demand. Whatever you expose the body to, it will adapt accordingly. And that's a really important one because it kind of lets you know that the body is like this very obedient pet, right? When you see a dog act out, it's not the dog's fault. The dog is just being a dog acting in the way that the dog was trained to act. It's the owner's fault for not training that dog. And our body is very similar. Our body is extremely obedient. It reacts based on what we expose it to. If it's giving us problems, almost all the time, we are the ones creating that problem. We might not know how we're creating that problem. And that might make it seem like that problem is just developing without any input or sort of role that we're playing to develop that problem. But once you know that the body is self-healing, self-organizing, and adapts specifically to whatever imposed demand is applied to it, you get right back into the driver's seat knowing that, wow, I can affect my body. I can get rid of the issues that I'm facing as long as I find out what I'm actually doing specifically to cause these problems. Because by eliminating the cause, you do 75% of the work without doing anything else. As long as you're patient and consistent and make long-term changes, very powerful things happen by just removing the cause of the problems that are basically happening because you're exposing your body to the wrong things. So once we correct those things, and once we know the body organizes itself in the most efficient way and it heals itself, even if I have an injury, cells in our bodies turn over and replace themselves. I think it's like every 7 years or something, that every cell in the body becomes recycled with a new version. And if you're giving yourself different inputs, if you're exposing your body to different things, it is going to lay down new cells in a different way, and in a way that reflects what you're exposing it to. So if you expose your body to natural inputs, right, wearing natural footwear that doesn't taper in, that isn't stiff, that doesn't support your arch, your feet are automatically going to restore themselves to natural function, which is strong, pain-free, resilient, able to take a lot, able to support the weight of your body and hold the arch up without you really doing anything else, as long as you're consistent and patient. Okay, so uploading assumptions, or updating assumptions rather, getting rid of the as I get older I break down, and if I haven't solved the problem in the past it's unsolvable, ditching those, because those are bullshit. You don't want those anymore. Those aren't going to serve you well, and they're actually false. And then uploading the assumptions of my body is self-healing, it organizes itself efficiently based on what I expose it to, and knowing that the SAID principle, specific adaptation to imposed demand, is in your corner and you can use it to your advantage by getting rid of the bad inputs, right? Getting rid of the demands you're imposing on your body that are facilitating that problem, getting rid of those, and then giving it good imposed demands to facilitate specific adaptations that get you back to a more functional, resilient state. Unlearn those bad assumptions, learn those new ones, take them on as truth, and those will help guide you through this whole process in a way that makes it much more optimistic and just allows you to know that your body's an incredible thing. We just have to make sure it's getting the right inputs. Thanks for listening. Catch you in the next video.